Not all of Carol Ann Duffy's dramatic monologues are about bitter and twisted and revengeful and poisoned old people. Anne Hathaway is a poem about somebody who really existed, rather than was a fictional character. We know that Anne Hathaway, older than Shakespeare, was his wife, and we also know that when Shakespeare went to London, he left Anne Hathaway back in Stratford-on-Avon. But in this poem, Anne Hathaway remembers very fondly and affectionately the relationship she had with William Shakespeare. The idea in this poem is that Shakespeare as a lover was as passionate and as skillful as he was as a writer. You can see this in the clever play and the way lovemaking is compared with adventurous and exotic activities in the poem. For example, Shakespeare's lovemaking was described as diving for pearls, and throughout the poem there are references to Shakespeare as a man who made love into an art. And this is expressed by the harmonious togetherness of bodies together like rhyme and assonance, and the way in which the poem links lovemaking with verb and noun. Well, two readers could look at this poem and come to the same conclusion, or, as so often, they could come to very different conclusions. Somebody could respond to this poem and see it as a tender and joyful poem. Here's a wife whose husband has died, but she feels very positive about the happiness of the memory, and it makes it a very upbeat poem about remembered passion. Or you might, knowing some of the history of the relationship, think that she's imagining all this, perhaps wishing it had been true, that their relationship was as harmonious as his poetry. When you're looking for comparisons with Simon Armitage, a useful poem to link with this one is Armitage's poem, I've Made Out a Will. This also begins with the idea of bequeathing somebody which will be a memory to somebody else. There are two poems in the pre-1914 bank which are natural choices to compare with these two. The first one is Sonnet 130, which is Shakespeare's own profession of love for somebody, perhaps not Anne Hathaway. There are various explanations of who he wrote this poem for, but it makes a good comparison with Havisham because it makes a link between writing poetry and being in love. A very different sort of poem is My Last Duchess. This is less a poem of happy love remembered than as something which begins with appearing to be remembering a loved one, but soon becomes something much murkier and nastier. Soon becomes obvious that the person who is loved has been murdered, and the husband, the jealous husband who did the murder, has preserved the memory of the wife in a portrait, and it's the portrait he loves more than the real person.